We're Maine Ghost Hunters, and we're here at Murderer's Cave in the Thorne Preserve in Bath, Maine, because it's said to be haunted.
Okay, I am recording. Hey.
Hi.
Where are we going?
Well, right now we are on our way to a lesser-known haunted hotspot that can be found in the mid-coast Maine woods in the tiny historic town of Bath.
Okay.
So this case has everything you might be looking for in a compelling ghost mystery. It has intrigue. It has murder. It has desperation.
Yeah.
And it has a secret hideout buried deep in the woods. It's pretty interesting. This is Ridge Runner Trail, so I think this little off the beaten path is where we want to go. I think it might be down there. Watch your step.
Okay.
It's going to be slippery. Especially on these rocks, they're going to be slippery. There it is. We are here at Murderer's Cave because this is where Daniel Wilkinson and his friend John Elliott decided to hide out the night before they burglarized the business in town. They stashed all their tools here, and then they went over the finer details of their plan for the perfect heist. This was the last of Wilkinson's best days because he's the reason locals call this place Murderer's Cave.
In the dead of night on September 3rd, 1883, a daring burglary attempt at the D.C. Gould Ship Chandlery and Provision Store in Bath, Maine ended in tragedy when Daniel Wilkinson and his accomplice John Elliott were caught in the act. In a desperate attempt to escape, Wilkinson collided with Constable William Lawrence and without hesitation shot Lawrence in the head with a .32 caliber revolver. The shocking events that followed would change the course of history in Maine. Daniel Wilkinson was a man of elusive origins and enigmatic demeanor. Born in 1845 in London, he was thought to have been raised in an educated, financially well-off family of faith. Daniel guarded the identity of his mother and father with unwavering secrecy until the day he died, leaving no trace for curious minds to follow. While he claimed his father worked as a tradesman, whispers among friends, acquaintances, and former workmates suggested a more prestigious connection, a clergyman perhaps. Even his own brother, thought to be a missionary in India, was a story Daniel vehemently denied ever telling anyone. Restless and rebellious, Daniel Wilkinson's thirst for adventure led him to run away from home at age 14, forsaking formal education in favor of life at sea, a decision that would eventually lead him to the shores of New England and the beginnings of a life of crime he wouldn't live long enough to escape. It was during his time in Thomaston State Prison, where fate would ultimately catch up with him, that Daniel revealed conflicting aspects of his character. He confided in a guard claiming to have been raised as an Episcopalian, only to defy such beliefs openly, asserting his agnostic stance. With a balding head, round face, and a portly figure, Daniel Wilkinson bore the physical marks of a life lived. He attributed his baldness to a battle with smallpox, claiming that hair would never grow in the affected areas after his recovery. At the time of his death, Daniel was 39 years old, 5'7", and weighed 170 pounds. Wilkinson's partner in crime on that fateful night of September 3, 1883, was a young man by the name of John Elliott, sometimes misspelled as John Hewitt. He and Daniel Wilkinson met while the two were in Philadelphia. They hit it off and decided to start working together, which eventually evolved into them traveling together from state to state, bouncing off seaports and pier jobs to working on rivers and in the lumber industry. The two men on duty the night of Constable William Lawrence's death were Officer Lawrence himself and a rookie by the name of Officer Kingsley, who had only been on the job for about 2 months to this point. Not much has been published about either officer, but we do know that locals referred to Constable Lawrence as Uncle Billy, and that he was one of the oldest and most trusted members of the Bath Police Department. Wilkinson's life before the shooting. Daniel Wilkinson's life before the fateful shooting was a turbulent journey marked by restlessness and criminal exploits. At the age of 14, he embarked on a life at sea, traveling the world and gaining notoriety as a free-spirited wanderer. Arriving in America around 1860, Daniel wandered along the East Coast, taking odd jobs without committing to any particular trade. In the winter of 1872, after his release from prison, Wilkinson found work as a logger at a logging camp in Harpswell, Maine. It was during this time that a heated incident occurred involving a dog that Wilkinson claimed to have purchased from a man from Lewiston. When the man tracked down Wilkinson at the logging camp, a public spectacle ensued, with Wilkinson vehemently denying the theft of this dog in front of a crowd of eager onlookers. However, once the man left with his dog, Daniel admitted to stealing the dog and that he had planned to sell it for extra cash. Despite these events, his workmates regarded him as a good man and enjoyed his company. Daniel Wilkinson's criminal history was riddled with thefts and escapades. In 1866, he was arrested for the theft of wheat from a grist mill in Pittsfield. Though he maintained his innocence, evidence linked tracks from the mill to the logging camp where Wilkinson worked alongside a man named Simons. Further investigation led the police to the Simons' residence, where they discovered Mrs. Simons and her daughter wearing stolen jewelry. In a surprising turn of events, Mr. Simons returned home with the sack of stolen wheat while the police were still there questioning his wife. The wheat was in a sack with the name of the grist mill it was stolen from printed on the outside for all to see. Wilkinson and Simons were both arrested, but Simons managed to escape by bribing a guard with $25 he had made from selling a cow he stole a short time prior. Wilkinson, on the other hand, confessed to multiple robberies committed across various towns and led the sheriff to a hidden stash of stolen goods. His admitted criminal spree extended across the state of Maine and included the towns of Palmyra, Newport, Dover, Hartland, Fairfield, Clinton, and Winthrop. With a history that included prior convictions for burglary and breaking and entering, Wilkinson had already established a pattern of unlawful behavior. His grudge against the state of Maine intensified after his conviction for the wheat theft, solidifying his commitment to a life of crime. Wilkinson's position was the state of Maine sentenced him to 7 years in prison for the theft of wheat from this grist mill, a crime he held firm he didn't commit. Sentenced to a total of 14 years in American prisons over a span of approximately 15 years spent in the United States, Daniel Wilkinson's troubled past and criminal exploits foreshadowed the tragedy that awaited him. The shooting. On the fateful night of September 3, 1883, Bath, Maine was thrust into a grim spotlight as the stage for a haunting tragedy that would resonate through its streets for years to follow. Daniel Wilkinson and John Elliott meticulously planned their burglary, carefully scouting the Bath business district and locating a hidden spot on the outskirts of town, now known as Murderer's Cave, to store their tools and loot. As midnight approached, veteran officer William Lawrence and rookie officer Kingsley embarked on their rounds, patrolling the unlit sidewalks of Front Street. In the darkness, Officer Kingsley ventured down Front Street, turning onto Arch Street and then Commercial Street. It was there that he heard the unmistakable sound of a break-in at the D.C. Gould Ship Chandlery and Provision Store, accompanied by hushed voices. Kingsley swiftly blew his whistle 3 times, signaling for Lawrence's attention and warning the intruders to halt. Ignoring the officer's commands, both men fled, with one defiantly questioning mid-stride and with no intention of stopping. "You wouldn't shoot, would you?" Kingsley fired a shot, intending it as a warning, resulting in Elliott and Wilkinson scattering in opposite directions. This warning shot prompted Daniel Wilkinson to cock his loaded .32 caliber revolver and to run with it in his hand until he was certain he was in the clear. While Elliott vanished into the night, Wilkinson sought refuge in an alley, unbeknownst to him that Officer Lawrence's path would soon intersect. Kingsley, determined to apprehend the criminals, attempted to track them down, running through the darkened streets. Suddenly, a gunshot shattered the silence, prompting Kingsley to hasten toward the sound. Struggling as he ran in pitch-black darkness, he stumbled over Officer Lawrence's lifeless body, sprawled face down on the sidewalk. Officer Uncle Billy Lawrence had been shot in the head and left for dead. Capturing Daniel Wilkinson. On September 11, 1883, the capture and arraignment of Daniel Wilkinson unfolded in a series of events that brought him to justice. the city of Bath, lacking its own detective staff, enlisted the services of 2 detectives from the Wigan and Wood Detective Agency, led by James Rodney Wood, a retired police officer from Boston. These detectives were hired for a daily rate of $10 in addition to expenses. Prior to his capture, Wilkinson and his accomplice John Elliott resided in a boarding house in Brunswick. A week before they burglarized a store in Bath, a break-in occurred at a local store in Brunswick. The burglars had utilized a distinct type of chisel, which was later discovered at the scene of the D.C. Gould ship chandlery and provision store in Bath. Furthermore, peculiarly shaped matchsticks found at the crime scene matched those found among Wilkinson and Elliott's belongings in the boarding house they had vacated. Following their criminal activities, Elliott traveled to Portland to lay low for a while. However, he eventually returned to the Brunswick area and stayed at the same boarding house. Something must have alarmed Elliott because he abruptly departed without settling his boarding bill and left behind his bag with all his possessions. These belongings were unequivocally identified as belonging to John Elliott. Elliott vanished on September 5, 1883, and speculations emerged that he had fled to England, where he couldn't be extradited. Within Elliott's abandoned bag, the detectives discovered an item that indicated Bangor, Maine as the likely destination for Elliott and Wilkinson's next move. 11 days later, following the discovery of the bag, Wilkinson was apprehended. At the time, he was working for a logging company on one of the rivers in the Bangor area. The day Wilkinson was caught came as a great surprise to him, and he wound up being quite belligerent and animated during his encounter with police. A frisk conducted by the detectives revealed a .32 caliber revolver on his person. Furthermore, Wilkinson carried a travel bag containing additional rounds for the gun, a can of gunpowder, and some fuses, tools commonly associated with thieves, burglars, and safe breakers. Wilkinson was subsequently put on a train bound for Bath. During the journey, he confessed the entirety of his crimes to the officers accompanying him. According to his confession, he and John Elliott were attempting to break into a store when they were discovered by the officers. In their attempt to escape, Wilkinson collided with Officer Lawrence, who had reached out to apprehend him. Remember, Daniel was already running with a cocked and loaded gun in his hand because Officer Kingsley had fired his weapon at them with a warning shot. Startled by the collision with Officer Lawrence, Wilkinson fired his gun, shooting Lawrence in the head. After the shooting, Wilkinson sought refuge in the cave where he and Elliott had operated prior to the burglary. Expecting Elliott to join him there, Wilkinson waited for about an hour. However, Elliott failed to appear, forcing Wilkinson to accept that they had parted ways and would not be traveling together from that point onward. Wilkinson devised an escape plan, dashing up High Street until he reached the water's edge. He stole a boat with a broken oar and rowed it across the river, eventually finding the rail line. From there, he made his way on foot to the nearest railroad station in Wiscasset, where he boarded the first train heading to Rockland. He remained in Rockland, hiding and keeping a low profile until Tuesday. On that day, he boarded a steamer bound for Bangor, where he was apprehended shortly after his arrival. Wilkinson's capture carried a significant reward of $1,000, prompting 7 men from Portland, Bangor, and Bath to apply for it once he was finally caught. Judge Libby presided over the case and determined that the reward would be divided equally among the 7 men. Interestingly, the detectives directly involved in the case declined the $1,000 reward offered by Mayor James Ledyard, asserting that accepting it could very well prejudice the jury. The trial. The state presented a compelling case against Daniel Wilkinson during his trial for the murder of Officer Lawrence. The prosecution's argument hinged on the fact that Wilkinson was carrying a gun, indicating premeditated intent to use it against anyone who stood in his way. The trial began on Thursday, January 3, 1884, with Detective Wood taking the stand as the first witness. Wood testified that Wilkinson had voluntarily confessed everything about the break-in and the murder of Officer Lawrence during their train ride. Detective Wood told Daniel Wilkinson directly that he knew Daniel was the one who threw the can of gunpowder through the window of the store they were breaking into. Wilkinson, being eager to outsmart the detective with all the little things he thought he knew about the burglary and subsequent murder, incriminated himself by correcting Detective Wood, clarifying that it was actually Elliott who threw the can of gunpowder during the break-in. Wilkinson claimed that they were startled by Officer Kingsley, who threatened to shoot them if they didn't stop to be arrested. Detective Wood recounted an incident at the police station in Bangor where Wilkinson initially gave his name as Ward. Wood informed him that his true identity was Daniel Wilkinson and revealed that he had previously escaped from jail in Bath while awaiting transport to the Maine State Prison in Thomaston for a term of 3 years regarding a completely separate case, but was now facing more serious charges, including the murder of Officer Lawrence. After the murder, Wilkinson fled back to the cave he and Elliot had used as their hideout previous to the burglary. He waited 1 hour for Elliot to meet up with him, and when that didn't happen, he fled to the river. He found a flat-bottomed boat with a broken oar, paddled across the river, located the railroad tracks, and ran along them to Wiscasset. There, he boarded a train and learned about the murder in Bath from a newspaper. Wilkinson sought refuge in Rockland for 2 days before ultimately making his way to Bangor, where he was apprehended. The prosecution called several witnesses to support their case. One witness was a saloon owner from Portland who overheard Wilkinson and Elliot discussing their activities in Bath. According to the saloon owner, Elliot told Wilkinson to choose another town for their operation since he was wanted by the police in Bath. Wilkinson told him not to worry. If anyone tried to arrest Elliot, he'd pull old Charlie on him. Then patted his right side at his hip where his gun was held. Another witness was the proprietor of a boarding house in Portland where Wilkinson and Elliot had stayed for 2 weeks before the murder. She received a letter from Wilkinson asking her to send his bag to him in Bangor by boat a week after the murder occurred. During the trial, Wilkinson recanted his initial confession while on the stand, claiming that the detectives had coerced him into confessing with false information. The trial lasted 4 days, and on Monday, January 6, 1884, at 4 p.m., the jury announced their verdict. Daniel Wilkinson was found guilty of first-degree murder. Wilkinson's sentence was death by hanging, scheduled to take place on November 26, 1885, between 11 a.m. and 2 p.m. Despite appeal attempts to have Daniel Wilkinson's death sentence commuted, his requests for clemency were denied. Final jail cell interview. The final jail cell interview with Daniel Wilkinson took place in cell number 189 at Thomaston State Prison. A reporter from the Lewiston Journal conducted the interview, which lasted approximately 30 minutes on Thursday, a day before Wilkinson's scheduled hanging on Friday. To the reporter's surprise, Wilkinson displayed an unexpectedly jovial demeanor throughout the interview. He laughed and smiled, although his voice noticeably trembled. Wilkinson admitted that he did not receive many visitors in prison, apart from the occasional visit from the prison chaplain, Reverend Frederick Towers. However, he did receive letters from Belle Knowles, a 40-year-old woman from Augusta, and her 8-year-old daughter, Lizzie. These letters focused on preparing Wilkinson for the afterlife through religious conversion. During the interview, Wilkinson expressed his thoughts on his spiritual beliefs, or lack thereof. He confessed to not having any concrete beliefs in the afterlife and believed that death would bring about darkness and nothingness. He shared this sentiment with both the chaplain and Belle Knowles, stating that he considered himself agnostic and did not believe in everlasting life or Christianity. Wilkinson refused to discuss his parents or anything related to his life in England. He was adamant about not wanting his father or mother to learn about the choices he had made in his adult life. He had not written to them in 5 years, so they remained unaware of his current circumstances. He purposely refrained from sending word to his friends in England out of fear that the information would reach his parents. Furthermore, Wilkinson held firm to his belief that immigrants and black individuals were disproportionately hanged in Maine. As he had never become a citizen, he was not surprised that he had been sentenced to hang, and he expected his appeals to be denied. Regarding his guilt, Wilkinson maintained that he was guilty of the death of Constable William Lawrence, but not of premeditated murder. He believed the shooting had happened in the heat of the moment and argued that he should not be hanged for accidentally shooting Officer Lawrence. When asked about his true last name, Wilkinson claimed that it was indeed Wilkinson, but there was no way to prove it. He revealed that he had used different names with his employers, and he wouldn't tell anyone how to reach his former employers for the similar reason of not wanting his parents finding out what had happened to him. He was ashamed. The interviewer didn't believe the name of the man he was speaking with was Daniel Wilkinson, but he had no other suggestions as to what Wilkinson's real last name might be. However, he did note that Wilkinson appeared far more composed than the previous inmate he'd interviewed before their execution day. While the last executed inmate was sweaty, had bloodshot eyes and tremors, Wilkinson seemed bright-eyed and energetic. Additionally, Wilkinson displayed a healthy appetite during the interview. When given the opportunity to make a statement on his own behalf to potentially sway public opinion about his circumstance, Wilkinson declined, stating that it didn't matter what people thought of him after he died. In terms of his overall thoughts about his situation, Wilkinson sincerely believed that the people of Maine were not receptive to immigrants. He felt wronged because he was an immigrant and believed that this was the reason he was being hanged. He perceived that people knew of his plight but didn't come to his aid. Wilkinson held the belief that Mainers would rather see immigrants suffer and die than offer them assistance. He pointed out that 5 of the last 6 executions in Maine involved either black individuals or foreign immigrants, reinforcing his views of systemic bias. Execution Day. In the final days leading up to his execution, Wilkinson surprised those around him with his demeanor. He seemed to have no complaints, accepting his fate with an unsettling calmness. Confined to a solitary cell during the week preceding his hanging, he slept unusually well for a man in his predicament. His appetite remained robust, devouring anything given to him. When Deputy Warden Hinckley inquired about his well-being, Wilkinson assured him that he felt fine and had no issues to report. Throughout this period, Wilkinson had numerous meetings with Chaplain Frederick Towers, engaging in deep discussion about faith and his own beliefs. He revealed that he had been born and raised Episcopalian but had lost his belief in God years ago, a sentiment he felt would not easily change. Despite the chaplain's attempts to appeal to Wilkinson's spiritual side, encouraging him to return to God in his final days, the convicted man remained steadfast in his skepticism. Chaplain Towers tried to appeal to Wilkinson's better self, his conscience, and asked Wilkinson if he found himself in the presence of men he claimed had wronged him over the years, would he hurt them? Wilkinson responded without reservation he would absolutely seek his revenge on the men he felt had wronged him. During one of their encounters, Wilkinson, puffing on a cigar, presented himself as indifferent and nonchalant about his impending demise. The chaplain found him indignant, obstinate, and seemingly resigned to his situation. However, as the time for his hanging drew nearer, Chaplain Towers visited Wilkinson again. This time, the convict's demeanor had shifted, displaying a more subdued tone and a curbed aggression. In a surprising turn of events, Wilkinson prayed with Chaplain Towers and tearfully admitted his vulnerability, revealing his uncertainty about the afterlife. It was a stark contrast from his previous belief that death simply led to eternal darkness. Wilkinson confided in Towers, confessing his plan to commit suicide in his cell. However, his resolve was shaken when he received a touching letter from Mrs. Knowles, the woman from Augusta who had been writing him religious messages throughout his incarceration. Her words convinced him to face his death with courage, like a man. Still, he maintained his wish that his family never discover the true nature of his demise, revealing details about his father, a tradesman living near London, and expressing his self-perceived weakness within his family. When asked about the disposal of his body, Wilkinson chose the prison cemetery as his final resting place. Then, at 11 a.m. on the day of his hanging, a dramatic occurrence took place. Mrs. Belle Knowles, accompanied by her 8-year-old daughter Lizzie, arrived unexpectedly, claiming to come in the name of Christ. Wilkinson was genuinely glad to see her, and their brief meeting lasted only 5 minutes. In that fleeting moment, he confessed that she and her daughter were the only true friends he had on this side of the water. Mrs. Knowles fervently expressed her belief that Jesus forgave the thief on the cross and would forgive Wilkinson as well. Although he wished for that forgiveness, he did not indicate a change of heart regarding religion. As a parting gift, Wilkinson gave her and her daughter a book of prayers and scriptures, inscribing their names within. Belle made 2 final pleas, asking him to disclose his real name and his parents' names, but he steadfastly refused both requests. As Belle Knowles left the room, she was overcome with emotion and nearly fainted, requiring the support of a guard. Pale and visibly shaken, she explained how her parents had initially misled her, claiming that the execution was postponed until the following month to prevent her from attending due to her fragile health. However, she learned of the true date Friday and rushed to the prison, determined to be there before his hanging. Despite her nervousness and illness, she had made it in time. The hanging of Daniel Wilkinson. At precisely 11 a.m. on Friday morning, the intricate process of Daniel Wilkinson's hanging began. Law enforcement officers assembled outside his cell. His arms were shackled and bound tightly to his sides. Remarkably, Wilkinson appeared relaxed and unbothered by the solemn proceeding. Warden Bean handed the final warrant to Sheriff Irish, who proceeded to read it aloud. Sheriff Irish and Reverend Towers, accompanied by 2 officers, began their somber walk toward the scaffold, flanked by Wilkinson. At 11:45 a.m., the convicted man emerged from the prison into the courtyard, accompanied by a group of officials from various parts of the state. Clad in a black shirt and pants, his hands firmly tied, Wilkinson walked with his head bowed, a heavy sense of resignation enveloping him. Approximately 30 individuals had gathered to witness the execution, most standing on the ground, their eyes fixed on the unfolding scene. From the time he stepped onto the trapdoor, he had 7 minutes to live. Deputy Sheriff Parker bound his feet, while Deputy Morton meticulously secured the noose around his neck. In an audacious jest, Wilkinson remarked, "This is the way you murder men for $50 a head, is it?" His facial expressions betrayed a mix of anticipation and fear, his face noticeably redder than those who had preceded him. Sheriff Irish signaled the commencement of the execution, prompting Chaplain Towers to approach Wilkinson. Whispering something in his ear, the chaplain clasped his hand before stepping back onto the scaffold. A final prayer, known as the Visitation of Prisoners, reverberated through the air as the chaplain beseeched, "In the midst of life we are in death. O Lord, lift up thy countenance upon us, and guide us both now and forevermore. Amen." Wilkinson's countenance remained unchanged, his resolve unyielding. Sheriff Irish, breaking the silence, posed the customary question, "Have you anything to say, Mr. Wilkinson?" In a simple yet resolute response, Wilkinson uttered, "No, sir." A black cap was placed over his head, and with the removal of the safety lock on the spring holding the drop in place, the sheriff proceeded to carry out his duty. At almost exactly 12 p.m., Wilkinson was dropped. His head fell to one side, contrary to the expected twirling motion. Convulsions coursed through his body for approximately a minute, and it became evident fairly quickly that his neck hadn't snapped and he didn't die instantaneously. Instead, he faced a slow and agonizing demise, likely succumbing to asphyxiation under the hood that concealed his face. Following his execution, Daniel Wilkinson's final request was honored. His body was laid to rest in the prison graveyard, marked only by the impersonal designation of number 26951. His grave to this day remains nameless.